let me start with a fundamental premise. Some of you may disagree with this because you come from very essential industries yourselves, but I'm going to start by saying that air transportation is an essential service. We treat it that way for government policy. Airlines got a big bailout here, and also in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world as well. Communities need air service to link them to the global economy. The highways in the sky are just like the highways on the ground, basic infrastructure necessary for daily life. And so after the Gulf War, we propped up airlines. After 9/11, we rescued the industry. And in this pandemic, we're supporting airlines at an unprecedented level. So the next slide, Kelsey. And we do that because the problem is unprecedented. I've covered the airline industry, as Ken said, for more than 25 years, and I never thought I'd see something as bad as 9/11 again. This disaster is actually orders of magnitude worse and likely to last longer. So we don't have good real-time measures of passengers except for TSA checkpoint throughput. That's as close as we can get. There are long delays in actually reporting who's on an airplane. So we look at who goes through TSA checkpoints, and that's a good approximation. Doesn't tell us how far they went, doesn't tell us how many connected, but it does give us a apples to apples comparison of what travel is doing. And when you look at this chart, you can see that the number of people flying in the U.S. increased this summer after really, almost reaching zero in April and early May. But the real question is, does this look like recovery to you? And the answer is no chance. We're down 72%, and we're actually about to drop more. After Labor Day, with few vacationers and almost no business travel, I think what we're really looking at is a return to something close to April and early May. Next slide. It's worth noting that some states have seen bigger drops than others. And here you can see, here you can see that the more stringent lockdowns in states affected air travel. The states with more virus control have seen the biggest drops, notably New York and Hawaii. I think this reflects a lot of things. I think what you're seeing there, particularly New York, Washington, Massachusetts, New Jersey, it also reflects a drop in business travel. It's typically concentrated in big East Coast business centers. You're seeing the self-quarantine requirements imposed by those states on people who live in Texas, Arizona, Florida, other places where there was summer outbreaks, increases of the virus. And I think it also reflects what we see in the greater ability of people on the East Coast to drive to new environments, take their vacation in Vermont or wherever, and skip the airplane trip. Next slide. But I think, as you all know, the problem is definitely worldwide. If you look at airline capacity, and again, this is not airplanes, but seats actually flying, we can look at August compared to August last year. You'll see that Latin America is actually the hardest hit region. It's lost 3/4 of its air capacity, compared to about 61% in both North America and Europe. South America has been hit harder than Central America, and Asia, interestingly, which has seen more recovery, has about half of the air service that it did a year ago. And remember, even though those seats are flying, it may be typically in the U.S. right now, about half of them are flying empty. And the ones that did get paid for most likely are flying on very cheap fares. So for the airline, you have not only the loss of people, but also the loss of the ability to collect anything close to a high fare from business travelers. So the bottom line, let's go to the next slide. Bottom line for air transportation, I think like so many other businesses, the difference between survival and corporate death is cash. Do you have enough cash on hand to ride out the storm? This is certainly true in many businesses, but I think you can argue that air transportation gets hit earlier than a lot of businesses, gets hit harder than a lot of businesses, and the recovery will probably come more slowly because of the situation. So can airlines go a year with just 25 or 30% of the business that they had in 2019? Take a quick look at British Airways. Its June cash burn rate, if you look at that June cash burn rate, British Airways had about 50 weeks of cash on hand, a little bit short of a year, and that's after it pre-sold $1 billion worth of frequent flyer miles to American Express. So you can see why BA is aggressively retiring aircraft, battening down the hatches for a long, harsh winter, and saying goodbye to classic airplanes like the Boeing 747, which they will never fly again. BA hopes to end the negative cash burn in the fourth quarter. But I think there's a real question now of whether anybody's going to be flying to London in December or anytime this year or early next year. So I also wanted to mention that airlines have had different strategies this summer on how best to reduce that cash burn. American got quite aggressive adding back flights and decided that there was some traffic out there, and if it could take as much of it as it could reduce its cash burn that way. It's easier to make that kind of gamble, I think, when the government is paying your labor costs, as was the case with the bailout. But nevertheless, American turned its hub at Dallas-Fort Worth into what became temporarily the busiest airport in the world. Also built up significantly in Charlotte. And curiously, United did exactly the opposite, grounded as much as it possibly could. I think at one point, United had just 14 flights a day operating out of Newark. So one of its most important hubs became a spoke about the size in normal times of Lubbock, Texas. American figured, there's early signs of a rebound in travel, and to some extent they got burned because the exuberance of June faded as infection rates rocketed, and we saw a drop in July and August. So the government funding of labor is going to run out at the end of September, and that's why you're seeing headlines of airlines warning of massive layoffs come October 1st. And I think that goes hand in hand with what will be a sharp decline in the little travel that we have now once summer ends and more kids go back to school, even virtual school. Next slide. I know you'll hear more about hotels in a following talk, but I just wanted to flag a few things. The hotel industry can benefit from people driving to properties just to get out of the house. We've seen that. July occupancy was about 47%. August is estimated to be close to 50%. But again, I think that party ends after Labor Day as well. Room rates are roughly half of what they used to be. And so it's a little surprised that one survey showed nearly 1 in 4 hotel loans was more than 30 days delinquent. Next slide. I wanted to include this interesting comment that I think can apply to just about any sector in travel. I do think, so the question was, is Vegas going to disappear? No, but are some resorts going to fail? Yes, and I think we will see more failures or at least bankruptcy reorganizations in air transportation and other areas of the transportation industry. I'm reminded of some wisdom I got many years ago in a previous downturn from a savvy Wall Street investor. He said, don't worry, there will always be airlines. They'll just have different names. Next slide. As I'm sure many of you know too painfully, the auto rental industry has seen a parallel decline. in an auto rental news survey, about 75% of respondents said their business was down by more than half. Next slide. It took the airline industry 6 years to recover from the 2001 terrorist attacks. And that recovery was short-lived, too, as you may recall, since the Great Recession hit a year or so later. So a decade of protracted downturn, really, for the airline business. After 9/11, it was clear what fixes needed to be made. Hardened cockpit doors that stayed locked, greater security screening. This time around, the fixes are less clear. Will widespread vaccination be enough to get people traveling again? Will it have to be coupled with an effective treatment, especially for older travelers? People won't trust the vaccine even if they get it. And so they want to be sure that they can survive the virus if they're going to start taking chances going out and traveling, exposing themselves to other people. Will we continue to wear masks on airplanes? Will we have to carry proof of vaccination to cross a border? Or somehow will we have to have increased distancing on board airplanes? It's not much of a news flash for everyone, but if you stay 6 feet apart in a 12-foot tube, the economics of air travel just don't work. The International Air Transport Association, the industry's trade group, recently revived its recovery forecast, moving it out 1 year to 2024, 4 years from the start of the pandemic. And I think that may be wishful thinking still. It does seem that recovery will come first in short-haul leisure travel. It will take longer for people to feel confident about going far afield and risking getting stuck somewhere if an outbreak happens. I think business travel will come back last, and some people think recovery to 2019 levels of business travel will be a long, long time coming, and there may be permanent change in this area. I was talking not too long ago to an airline CEO who was confident that business travel was going to rebound because Bob Crandall, the legendary former chief of American Airlines, had taught him that new technologies always stimulate travel rather than replacing it. So in past downturns, people wrote stories saying, oh, video conferencing was going to run airlines out of business after 9/11. Before that, it was, the fax machine was going to negate the need to get on an airplane and go sign many transactions, all of that. It turns out what Bob taught, what he believed was that those connections you make through technology, they spawn more need to have human interaction. And so you meet new contacts through technology all over the globe, but eventually you're going to get on an airplane and go meet them in person or do business in person. So I called Bob to see if he still believed that. And I was shocked at the answer, because the answer was not at all. Bob said, airlines will have to come up with new business models because corporate travel is going to be permanently changed. The new video technology, he argued, was too ubiquitous. Look at us today. Look at all the Zoom meetings you've had. We all have the technology on our laptops and phones. No special equipment is needed. It's too easy to use, and it really is too good. So why do you have to get on an airplane to go to a board meeting 6 times a year, Crandall asked? Maybe it will just be twice a year in person, and the rest will be by Zoom or WebEx or whatever. So keep that in mind as we move forward. I do think that October 1 will be a watershed moment for air transportation. There's pressure building in Washington for another bailout, but there may well, one way or another, be massive layoffs and certainly uncertainty over what recovery looks like. This is one industry where things are likely to get worse before they get better.